sun hung low over the crumbling rooftops, casting golden rays through the dusty alleyways of the forgotten part of town. Among the shadows, barefoot and silent, two small children wandered, Ethan, 10, and his little sister Amara, just 6. Their clothes hung loose on their bony frames, dirt smeared across their faces, their small hands clutching a single paper bag that held the last 2 slices of bread they had. They hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Their mother had passed away the previous winter from a fever they couldn't afford to treat, and their father had disappeared one night, never to return. Since then, Ethan had tried to be the protector. He picked scraps, begged silently outside bakeries, and held Amara close when the nights got too cold. Still, they remained invisible to a world too busy to care. That afternoon, Ethan had found a half loaf of bread in the trash behind a grocery store, mostly crushed, but still edible. He gave most to Amara, but saved the final 2 slices for later, just in case they didn't find anything tomorrow. As they walked down the alley, looking for a corner to rest, they saw her. A woman sat slumped against the brick wall, her dress dusty and faded pink. She was clearly pregnant, very pregnant. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, one hand resting protectively over her belly. Her other hand hung limp by her side. She looked lost, broken, and helpless. Ethan stopped. His instincts screamed to keep walking. Food was rare, survival even rarer, but something in her eyes silenced that thought. They weren't begging, they weren't demanding, they were pleading, not for herself, but for the life she carried. Amara tugged at his shirt. "Ethan, is she okay?" He didn't answer. Slowly, he reached into the bag and pulled out the 2 slices of bread. Without saying a word, he walked toward the woman, Amara following silently. The woman blinked in surprise as Ethan held out the bread with both hands. For a moment, she just stared, speechless. Then her lip trembled, and tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but only a cracked whisper came out. Why would you?" "We had some," Ethan said simply. "You need it more." She took the bread with shaking hands, cradling it like it was something sacred. "My name is Grace," she said after a long pause. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. I lost my husband in a car accident last month, and I have nowhere to go." There in that quiet alley, the 3 broken souls sat together, 2 children who had lost their world, and a woman holding onto the last piece of hers. She tore the bread in half, handing 1 piece back to each of them. "We share," she said softly. That night they slept together under the overhang of an old mechanic's garage. Grace kept the children warm with her coat, even though her own body shivered. The next morning, she insisted on finding help, for them, not herself. With what little strength she had, Grace led the children across the city to a women's shelter she'd heard about. The walk was long, and Grace had to stop often, leaning against walls, fighting the pain in her back. When they finally reached the shelter, a kind-faced woman opened the door and gasped. She quickly called for help. Within minutes, Grace was being tended to by medics. Ethan and Amara tried to leave, thinking they'd just brought her to safety, but Grace refused to let them go. She clung to Ethan's hand and whispered, "You saved me, now it's my turn." The shelter took them all in. Grace was given a clean room, food, and prenatal care. Ethan and Amara were bathed, clothed, and fed. For the first time in weeks, they slept on soft beds, but the story didn't end there. After giving birth to a healthy baby girl she named Hope, Grace made a promise to never forget the 2 children who shared their last piece of bread. She began volunteering at the shelter, helping other women and children in need, always with Ethan and Amara by her side. One day, a reporter came to do a story on the shelter. Grace shared everything, how 2 starving children had saved her life, how they had nothing but still gave, how they became a family when none of them had one. The story went viral. Donations flooded in. Grace was offered a job as a shelter coordinator. A local business owner offered her a house to rent at minimal cost. Ethan and Amara were enrolled in school for the first time, given tutors, clothes, and more food than they had ever dreamed of. But it wasn't the money or the fame that mattered. It was what Grace did next. She officially adopted Ethan and Amara. At the courthouse, the judge asked her why. "Because family isn't always blood," she replied, holding hope in one arm and Ethan and Amara by her side. Sometimes, it's a boy who gave up his only food for a stranger. Sometimes, it's a little girl who shared her warmth without even knowing your name. And sometimes, it's a broken woman who was ready to give up, but found a reason to live again because of them. Years passed. Ethan grew into a young man with a heart full of purpose. He became a social worker, determined to help other children like him. Amara became a teacher, lighting the spark of kindness in the hearts of her students. And Grace continued to run the shelter, her story a living reminder of how love, compassion, and one small act of kindness can change everything. The world often forgets the ones who have nothing. But in one quiet alley, on one dusty afternoon, 2 starving children did something the world couldn't ignore. They gave their last bread to a stranger. And in return, they got a mother, a home, and a future. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the greatest miracle.